Three.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah West. I am going to be talking with you about healing past trauma and how that affects the present moment and future moments. And so there was a recent video, well, it wasn't really recent, but I watched it recently. But it was from Nasim how do I say his name? Nasim Haramein. And it's actually a 6-part series on YouTube. And I think I caught a snippet of this video. And I want to read you a section of that so you can kind of understand what prompted my kind of, seeing the connection to evolutionary astrology and some other thoughts as it pertains to the psyche from other authors. One of them is a psychologist, another is a biologist, so kind of taking it from a couple of angles here. But I wanted to jump into this, so let me get into sharing my screen. That one. Okay. And that looks all right, I hope.
Yep, we can see it.
Do you want full screen on that? No,
well, you need to see the left-hand column, don't you? So.
Yeah. When I go full screen, sometimes I lose my ability to see the things. So I'm going to leave it at that. All right.
Okay.
Is that all right? Okay. I tried to make big slides, so hopefully that works. Anyway, so let's see here. Jumping in here. Is it going? There we are. I'll hide the notes section so you can't see that. So I'm going to actually just jump into, so there was this, like I said, 6-part series. The section that jumped out at me was pulled, I think, from his section 3, because he has like a part 1 and a part 2, and it's like a long talk he gave in Spain. It was called Cognos something. And I have the link here in my next slide. But essentially what I want to read the little snippet. I actually listened to this video, I don't know how many times, to try to get this for you all, because I think you got to have this piece for the other pieces I'm going to add on to here later in this presentation. So here we go. He says, in quotes, "We've got some people saying we don't need consciousness, we don't need spirit, and others say we don't need matter. Guess what? It's all the same. It's all one. It's this fundamental field that produces a learning structure in space-time that makes up all of the material world, which is an expression of the structure of space-time itself, learning about itself. This is why matter evolves. It doesn't just sit there and do nothing. It actually evolves. It moves together. It tries. It organizes in many complex ways and producing amazing, amazing worlds. So it's not separated, and that has to go away, that thinking. The monks who say we don't need the material world have to come and understand the material world is spirit. And the physicists and the scientists that say we don't need spirit have to realize the material world is spirit. It comes together. What is spirit? Spirit is all the information of all things present in everything. Right? Which I give you, and he says, which I give you an equation to prove to you that is so. So he has all this math, very high-end theory that he's developed. It's quite detailed, and I would encourage you to watch the whole thing to get that part of it. But he's basically proving it in math about the space-time structure. Continuing on with his quote. So the speed of light comes out in his equation. Remarkable. Think of yourself as this light body. You are a light body. Imagine it is because from the frame of reference of your size, it's your relationship to size that's confusing you because of the size we are relative to the scale. We're sitting around going, there's not much going on here because of our perspective of being on Earth, spinning around the sun that's inside of the galaxy. So we're going, at these amazing speeds, but it's our perspective. He says, we teach our children that the planet goes around the sun in a circle. which we should never, ever teach children this. This is wrong. Our sun is traveling 3,000 miles per second, and planets are making a huge spiral. So the sun is moving through space, also going in a spiral, but the planets are in orbit around the sun, but traveling at 3,000 miles per hour with the sun in their orbits and so forth. And he says every minute second is different from the other because the evolution coordinates space-time manifold is constantly changing, never coming back to the same point because the sun is moving through the space so quickly as well. The information constantly changing. We are through speed of light of interaction, we are embedding information along on the structure of space-time, along the path. Your DNA is embedding information along that path. And he's like, there's proof for this because there's a thing called phantom DNA discovered by the Russians. He gives a detail of this experiment of proof of phantom DNA. I'm not going to go into that here. But DNA leaves an imprint of information on the structure of the vacuum. And you are imprinting information on the structure of the vacuum. And this is actually, according to Nasim, why you have memory. Because if you have no memory, you wouldn't have time. It wouldn't exist because you couldn't remember anything. Actually, memory, which has not been identified in the brain, scientists, have looked in, like, where is consciousness in the brain? He says, Buckminster Fuller said it best. He said, the problem with the current approach to science is that we've confused the telephone for the conversation. The brain is the telephone. It's not the conversation. The conversation is structure of the vacuum interacting. The chemistry that occurs in the brain, the electrical discharge, is the result of the structure of space-time interacting, not the source. And that's why if there's a disturbance in our field, in our emotion, then chemistry starts to change in the brain. You can't just change the chemistry of the brain and assume that the problem, the emotional trauma, and all this is going away because it is still embedded in the structure of space-time. So using this, he's helped, he says, I've helped people that had serious trauma, try to help them relieve that trauma because somewhere it's on the structure of space-time. So using this, since that actually connects right up to he says, like, in your back, then you have access to that structure along the path. This is actually how psychology works. People say you think of your child and you try to have a new outlook on your childhood, and that will relieve you from trauma. Well, that's because you are actually changing the memory imprint on the structure of space-time by having a new perspective on it. You can actually follow the information of you along that structure all the way back to your mother. The spiral goes all the way back to your mother. That connects your spiral with her spiral. Where you can connect with your mother's, you can also go to your father's spiral. So you can kind of choose mother or father spiral. You can explore those connections and what may be coming down through the family line from there. So then you can continue along that path and again. So your mother's mother, he's like, this is actually how, according to his work, so it's his theory, I'm going to point that out, that genes can keep information continuous down the line. In current biology, there's no explanation how genes carry all this information that produces the genetic pool. The continuous from one family to another family, and along that path. This is because the imprint is actually informing the genome structure. So along that path, you can actually go with your consciousness, and he's been able to do that, like I said, and along that, you can change your relationship to an event. You can change the geometry. So if there was an event that was traumatic, you can actually experience the event from a different angle. For instance, for canceling the event completely, if somebody did something wrong to you, you can experience the event from that perspective, from the person who did something to you. And there you're going to experience their fear, their trauma, and all of this. And then that will cancel your experience. And then all of a sudden, all the information going forward back to your present will change. And as a result, he's had people who've had healing, like almost like instantaneous for something that's been long held in their life, in having a release of that trauma. And as you change this, it's going to change it forward to the present. So by going back and healing something, you're not only changing that, you're changing everything forward as well. And from that moment, you can change, because when you change it, it's going back in the spiral. Now you're changing generation of information throughout time. Your mother, your grandfather, your grandmother, your father, your grandfather, and so forth. Because you are the very tip of the spiral. And that can go back generations and generations, depending on whatever's been carried forward. So he says, it's your responsibility that you've accumulated all this information from all these generations. It's your responsibility to make it different. And I thought that was pretty darn powerful. And when I heard that, I immediately thought of a couple of things. Number one, I thought of evolutionary astrology, kind of like the work that Patricia Walsh does with regression that's in the Evolutionary Astrology journal. There's a great article in there that she shares some very specific cases that she's done. And it's healing something from the past that's been carried forward. And by healing it now, not only is it healing it from going back, but it's also enabling that individual to live more fully and whole as they go forward. And I think that's a powerful example for that. Nasim also mentions as a part of his discussion, as you get to understand, I think it's through part 1 and part 2, his theory is stating we are made of infinite little black holes and are spinning at the speed of light, which are the protons, concluding that you are made of light, we're all made of light. And he does it with mathematical equations, which you kind of have to follow, but I encourage you to look at this material because it's quite exciting, even though it's a little math heavy, but he makes it simple for you. And I love how he puts in this higher conscious awareness around the connection to our divine selves. And so he makes this comment, many masters have come and said, everything is light. Maybe that is what they meant. Everything is spinning at the speed of light. You have light body, the infinite potential, the light body that you are. And it's not an esoteric thing, but the material world that you are made. No separation between spirit and matter, dynamic of the space of itself, dynamic of the vacuum itself. The material world is the gateway to infinity. And he talks about no need to escape. This is the gateway to infinity with the two. So I wanted to point that out. Oh, he also talks about the memory imprint of how we are little universes in ourselves, but we're interacting with other little universes, and that you're creating your reality and your reality is creating you as you interact with these. So it's quite fascinating and complex. On to the next slide. Here's the link to the part 3 video that I pulled that information out of, but I would encourage, if you have the time to invest, I've viewed part 1 through part 4 so far. He has 6 parts of this, and they're about an hour each. And so there's the link for that if you'd like to go and spend some time exploring his thoughts and his theory. Another piece of information that kind of added to this conversation and thought was, I follow a lot of different authors. I read a lot. There's a book by Bruce Lipton, doctor, PhD. Anyway, it's called Biology of Belief. A lot of people have probably read this book or come across this book, and it's a couple years old. I don't know when it was published, but anyway, a couple of comments. 2005, I think, was the first copy. So it's 12 years old or so. But he had a few comments that I thought would, lend into this about our connection to being entangled. And he's like, if you have pendulum clocks on the wall and start them all at different times, after a while, the pendulums will all swing in synchronicity. And the same thing happens with heart cells in a petri dish. They start beating in rhythm even when they're not touching one another. And it's like a statement about our entanglement. Another one he has is, there's a theory that says that life is based on a competition and the struggle and the fight for survival. And it's interesting because when you look at the fractal character of evolution, it's totally different. It's based on cooperation among the elements in the geometry and not competition. I love that one. And then last one, if the brain expects that a treatment will work, it sends healing chemicals into the bloodstream, which facilitates that. And the opposite is equally true and equally powerful. When the brain expects that a therapy will not work, it doesn't. It's called nocebo effect. So I wanted to, excuse me, add that into the conversation because it's kind of pulling in Nasim's theory, but from the chemical part of our makeup, since Bruce is a chemical biologist professional, and I wanted to add that in here as it pertains to the healing. Another book that I thought would be powerful to add into this conversation is a well-known psychologist who wrote the book Waking the Tiger, Peter Levine. And basically his book is about that trauma exists not in the event or in the story of the event, but is stored within the nervous system. And the nervous system, I believe, is like Uranus and Aquarius, if I'm not mistaken, correlating. So it made me think of that. And many common physical ailments are actually residues of thwarted trauma reactions incurred during such events as surgical procedures, falls, pre or perinatal stress, and or childhood accidents and traumas. And I think they even spoke of like car accidents and so forth. I think that's included here. It says the body has a natural, innate, and miraculous capacity to heal once these reactions are understood and guided. And he points out that our memories are not literal recordings of events, but rather a complex of images that are influenced by arousal, emotional context, and prior experience. Memories may even transform over time as new experiences add layers of meaning to the images. And so that was from a reviewer. It goes on, I think, let me see the next one. Here. That's number 6. Those with deep psychological scars may have disassociated memory from their minds and are living in a numbed, tense body, awaiting its release so the body can return to wholeness and optimum mental and physical health. The author asserts that psychological wounds are reversible and that healing comes when the physical and mental letting go occurs. Similar to the way the tiger experiences the coming and going of a threat, tensing in response to danger. And as the threat passes, the tiger's muscles shake, twitch, and let go right then and there the fear related to energy, which now is forever out of the mind and the body. So it's an immediate release. And trauma is stored energy that must be released. So what I thought was interesting is kind of bringing in different thoughts as it relates to trauma and how it is, how we sit with trauma, how it's connected, how we are in the subconscious mind, and how humans tend to hold on to it and not release it till they're actively working on it. So I thought that was a nice add to this conversation as well. Now, Jeffrey Wolf Green, in the glossary, the Evolutionary Astrology glossary, I actually did this out of the hard copy book. I think I have page numbers in my notes here. So I wanted to tie in what he had discussed on this relative to DNA. So I looked up kind of what was DNA and related to Sol and Pluto. And Sol and Pluto is the genetic code. It is the RNA, DNA, chromosomes, and enzymes. So I wanted to pull out a couple of things that are quoted by him or by Rad in the glossary so we can tie this in to the conversation. So in there, it's noted by Jeffrey that in each life, the soul is determinant for the entire genetic code of life, human form that is being born into. Each life that the soul chooses is a confirmation of that which has come before, where each new life taken correlates to ongoing evolutionary lessons or intentions of that soul. Thus, the body type, which includes race to be born into, the appearance of it, the culture to be born into, the parents of origin, the specific and individual nature of the emotions, feelings, psychology, desires, and so on correlate to the soul's intentions reflected in the genetic code in total in each life. Thus, any person can say things like, this is who I am, this is what I need, this is what I'm feeling, and this is what I'm trying to learn, and so on. And the individualizing aspect of the ego that the soul creates in each life. So, tying this a little, just this first part into Nasim's theory, and I was looking at the connections here, is from an evolutionary astrology standpoint, I can see where Nasim's work is, it's not proven yet. It's all theory what he's doing. He's got the mathematical equations. He's still trying to be published or peer-reviewed into the journals and so forth, so to be bought, so to speak, by the current community that he works in as a theoretical physicist. So from Jeffrey's statement here, I can see the two connecting together. However, it seems that the soul can go beyond a family line, but maybe the soul is lining up to the for whatever the soul intends to work on specifically in a particular life, and the time is ripe, and it can. I'm thinking that if that can enter in to the parents of origin, as he talks about here, or culture as it relates to that journey of healing, whatever is ready to come forward. So I thought that was important. And moving on, there was a Q&A also in this and in the book. And this also, I think, pertains to that. This was, I think, page 145 was the last piece. And this is with, I think, on 156. But the question is the soul imprinted with the Saturnian structures of its past lives, correlating to the genetic code of its ancestors? And can these Saturnian structures with the soul then play out and morph from one country race to another? And the answer was yes. So basically it's tying in kind of what the Saturn piece is here. And then he goes on to ask the question, because the genetic code by which DNA stores the genetic information correlating to the Saturn, Pluto, Uranus in the root chakra, does this mean a soul can only keep reincarnating according to that one genetic code or ancestry? Can a soul switch over to a totally different genetic code due to the evolutionary intentions? If so, can this switch over to a new race happen gradually, or suddenly can several races be stored in the genetic code of a soul? And I thought this was important because of what Nasim was talking about, is if you're on the edge of the spiral of a family, you're coming in, and yet you're carrying the information now from what your soul, this is what I'm picking up from Jeffrey's conversation here, information, with the Saturn, Pluto, Uranus in the root chakra, you're carrying that from the family line now in this incarnation as well. But it's also that the soul has chosen it because of its ultimate desire of where it's evolving. And that's what I'm picking up here. And then he goes on to answer, the soul has all the memories of everything that it has ever done, experienced, relative to the desires that it has had for whatever conditions that it has chosen to be born into. The soul can choose to be born into the genetic code of its ancestry or not. So that had me thinking. So it's really at the soul has that freedom to choose where it's. It could even choose So if you're born into a family line, it has, and the family line has a history, say, of certain kind of illness or a certain kind of traumatic kind of recurring trauma that comes down the family line in different forms, but still in the same, say, similar theme. I think that could be that the soul has an intention for itself to evolve, and it's using that material as well. But if the soul does move to evolve and heal it, it has the potential to heal the family line. So it has the potential to heal not only that soul at the very edge of the spiral, being the the child before another child is born that has that history. So it can have that potential. It sounds like that. That's what it seems to be saying. Next piece here. Oops, did I get the last piece on that? Oh, it can totally switch to another genetic code altogether. So I think it depends on what the soul, I think it's what he's saying is it depends on what the soul wants to, where they're at in the evolution. Did they go to the next level? Did they make that move? Or are they repeating something and it requires going to another family dynamic or culture dynamic to make that realized? So he says the switch to a new race is just that, meaning it is sudden. And again, everything the soul has ever done by way of the totality of all prior lives is stored within the soul itself, memory. And that totality is of itself conditioning the soul from moment to moment, no matter what race or country or parents, et cetera, at all times. So one last little bit here from the Evolutionary Astrology Journal. It says, the question was, since Pluto, the soul, correlates to the RNA, DNA, and Saturn, Neptune to skin coloring, how can the soul, who was a Black American in the previous life, can then be born as a white-skinned American in the next life? The confusion lies in the interpretation of the fourth house, representing our roots, ancestry, and where we spring from. It is said that the line of ancestry is traced back to countless past generations. It seems that the soul can retain the one ancestral line for many generations and then suddenly change it. Most traditional tribes live in the continual presence of the ancestors and expect their offerings and guidance. How can a soul within a past life tribe nationality that honors its genealogical memory, and ancestral deities suddenly change in its ancestry in the next life? And how is this information passed down or stored in Pluto, the soul? And his answer, Rad's answer, is the soul is a determinant of what it needs evolutionarily and karmically in each life. It can very easily shift from one skin color to the next or one gender to the next if it so chooses. So it's kind of interesting because my first thought was, okay, you're automatically going to be working in the same family line for some time, but that's not necessarily so from this data, from this information. So, but it's really where the soul is in the evolutionary and it choosing the best combination of all of that to incarnate. So that's the Pluto. But I thought it was interesting that we could look at maybe Saturn and Uranus and Pluto and how that may look as we look back in time, or at least from the ancestral line to where we're at. And I contacted my mom. I asked her if I could use her chart and she said yes. And I also asked her for my grandmother's information because I thought it would be interesting to go back a little bit to see what you could see, because I have my daughter who's young, and we'll look at me and my daughter connection, and we'll also look at my mother, Carol, and my grandmother. I know her as Peggy, but we'll go into that, see what we see. Okay, so I wanted to look at Saturn for the Sagittarian structure, and I also wanted to look at Pluto and Uranus, and to see if there was any other pieces of themes that seem to be repeating in planets, or at least outer planets, especially Pluto. So my mother is on the inner wheel, and my grandmother is on the outer wheel. I don't have the exact time of my grandma's birth, but I do have her location and all of that. So I did a sunrise chart for my grandmother. So the moon would be off a little bit in her chart potentially. The ascendant is not accurate, but I wanted to at least get the outer planet information, Saturn, that's going to be all fine, and map it to my mother's. So my mother's ascendant is accurate. Everything's accurate from my mom's birth certificate information. So looking at right away, my grandma was born in the Pluto Cancer, and she has the Mercury in Cancer. It's within 10 degrees, so it would definitely be part of her evolutionary journey with the combination. My grandmother was a wonderful bookkeeper, really sharp, but she did have a first marriage that was abusive before she met my grandpa, roller skating. But what was interesting is, so I knew that about my grandma's history, that she had a very troubling first marriage. And she was also my great grandmother, which was Marcella, Peggy's mother, was my mom called her a red-headed woman who had 5 husbands. So my grandmother, my mom's mom, had quite an experience of growing up and having to be the responsible one and taking care of children. So she had that similar thing to my life, which in a different vein, but very similar. But was a worker bee and did really great at keeping the books, and which I thought was interesting. But she did take the time and money and left that first husband, which was very tricky during that period of time, to get herself to a better situation, and then eventually met my grandfather, and then my mom was born after they got married. So so my grandma has an interesting history related to some physical abuse. You look at the South Node in Taurus up there in on the top, and when I look at that, and I look at the Saturn of, where's her Saturn? Grandma's Saturn was down in Virgo. So I was kind of seeing what the connection was with the father figure and so forth. So there's some kind of repeating themes there. And her nodal axis at the 15 Taurus Scorpio, her North Node Scorpio, her Jupiter and also her, her Neptune are square to the nodes. And then also looking at her Uranus was up in 5 degrees of Pisces, which is interesting because that's only a few degrees off my Mars. But then I look at what kind of my mother picked up. My mother picked up the Pluto in Leo generation, Saturn conjunct in Leo. And that's interesting because my mom definitely has a lifelong thing that she's been working on in terms of her self-worth connected to power and money. So that was interesting to see. And then also that the North Node of my grandma is on my mom's Venus. And then if you look over at my grandma's Venus over there in the 12th, my mom's 12th house, it's conjunct the Uranus. So I'm seeing some connections. I'm not completely got this gelled all the way of the connections here yet, because I haven't gone deep dive into this completely, but I'm seeing the connections as it relates to themes that could be explored around where there may be some trauma that they're healing, and one is picking something up and then carrying it forward and so forth if it's not healed. Or it heals to a certain level of where they get to, and then progression. So I'll come back to this, but I wanted to just point that out, those few as well. Here's the next chart is, let's see if it gets there. There we go. Inner wheel is my daughter, and then I'm on the outer wheel. so I thought it was interesting to look at, again, Pluto, Uranus, and Saturn. And I can see that there's very strong Pluto coming through the archetype, definitely in my Jupiter and my Sydney's fourth house. So that is definitely carrying through. So there's definitely a strong transformation going on deep within the Scorpio archetype between what's come from me to my daughter. And also Uranus is in here as well, as it was with my mother and her mother, because my let's see here, where is it? Sydney's Uranus is square her moon, which I'm symbolic for her. So from the 8th. So the 8th is the natural zodiac, the Scorpio natural of the natural zodiac. There's also my sun is conjunct her Pluto within 2 degrees. So again, there's that definitely coming forward. I also have Saturn in Taurus. You can see that in her 10th house. And her Saturn is in Leo. So definitely from the Saturn, I see that for it coming through for Sydney, it's square her Jupiter and her Mercury. So there's a strong square going on there for her life, throughout her life of that. And so I want to open this up to kind of see what others can possibly see from these connecting themes about how we may be carrying, certain archetype symbolisms, passing them down, or where we're healing. I went through my healing, like a major healing in my life after my daughter was born. There was some level of healing before my daughter was born, but there was a catalyst, more of a catalyst after she was born. So I kind of wonder if how that influence, I know that influences in some way, but the fact that she was born and has her own birth chart, it's that's reflective for her whole life. But there's definitely some kind of transformation, and I'd love to hear what other people have thoughts of this, of maybe their own, or what they're seeing by, if they wanted me to stay on this by wheel, or if they want me to go to my mother and grandmother for what you see. So I'd love to hear and have some sharing on this in the next, say, 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. That was amazing. How interesting. Thanks so much. I'm looking at your Jupiter in the 4th house and Sydney's Mars.
Yes.
And they're very tightly conjunct, and her Venus as well, actually, and her Sun. So the ruler of Scorpio is Pluto, which is the soul. So let's look at your Pluto, which is at Virgo. And her Pluto is in Sag, and they're actually square each other. So that's interesting. So I feel that could be a progression of the, I don't know, I'm not sure of the language to use, but you know what I mean.
The healing coming down the line. So this piece coming through, so she's picked it up from the family line, but it's also in line with her own soul trying to evolve this piece, right? So it's picking up. Now, does it show up in, it's definitely Plutonic themes, right? Like massive transformation of self. And it's coming from a deep 4th house perspective too. So
that's
for
right.
her, and also her 4th, but also her Pluto sits in the 5th. So I don't know how you go tie that together off the top of my head, but would that tie that in with because that's the because I kind of, her Pluto's in the 5th and her Saturn's in Leo. So there's this tie with being able to be self-expressed somehow. But it's transformational. It's a huge transformation of the self. And
yeah.
So yeah, I was kind of looking at that. I did not create a chart between myself and my mother, which would be probably my next round. But I think it's interesting to kind of look at these from that perspective. So say I've gone through a healing process. So my daughter is benefiting from me sharing astrology with her as she'll be introduced to it. She has some tool close to her that she can choose. But she may not choose it, right? So she may push it away. We don't know yet. So yeah, because I think that's profound. But
yeah, like your Pluto,
you know what I mean?
Your Pluto is conjunct her South Node in Virgo. So, she has a desire to, look through all the details and go very deeply into all the little bits and pieces. And so we're looking at basically the question of, philosophy and and being able to share that together. And because, Jupiter is very much, representative of different cultures. And so you both have an interest in that. Your son's in Sag and it's conjunct her Pluto. So you can see that it is part of the family. It's part of it's an issue that that you hold together. Or desire, a soul desire, actually.
Soul desire, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Any comments?
Hi. I find it interesting that you are activating her, if I'm reading that correctly, it looks like you're activating her skip step.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because her skip step is Pluto, and my sun sits right on it.
Right. Yeah. That jumped out at me. And your Venus as well.
Yep.
Isn't that your skip step?
My skip step is Venus.
Yeah.
Which symbolically, isn't Venus also a daughter?
Yeah. I would think so. I'm not really sure, but it would definitely represent the feminine,
The feminine, yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's interesting, yeah. So I'm still working on kind of tightening up kind of the language around, these connections, but I definitely can see them. I can see like the Uranus and I can see the Pluto piece and definitely the Uranus. If I jump over to my grandmother's, if you see my mom had Uranus at 19 Gemini and my grandma's Venus was at 19 Gemini, which that Gemini is grandma's ruler is Mercury, which is conjunct Pluto, and Venus is also the Southhold ruler. So that's kind of tying in that Uranus to my mother. And then I looked at my mom's Venus was near my grandma's North Node, so it's like this interesting link, and I have to unravel that all the way. There's a lot going on there, step by step, but also. What was the other thing I saw? I saw the connection to my grandma with her Uranus in 5 Pisces and my Mars, which is my ruling planet of my ascendant in Pisces. My Mars is at 2 Pisces. So I'm seeing these connections. I see similar themes, but they're playing out through different similar. So it almost have to do the full-blown, kind of evolutionary astrology reading for each individual and then tie the themes through. But my grandma dealt with traumatic relationship with men through my great grandma Goldie, having 5 husbands and, kind of abandonment issues and having to care for her siblings, and then having married someone who, physically abused her. And then she left that. She stood up for herself and finally left that, took her 2 boys and, worked and then moved on to then marry my grandpa, who is a very gentle creature, loving creature, wonderful man. And then they had my mom. And so but my mom, it's interesting how the parents are and how they are with their children. It's such an interesting thing as it carries forward, because my mom learned, my grandfather for a lot of her I guess it would be elementary years, he was out traveling a bit, and he would bring back things, and she started to relate love to getting a little gift. And so that shows up in her value system with the Pluto and the Saturn. But there was also kind of a difficulty of my mom and her relationship with her mother, because my grandmother was strict, and my mom had to work with that. And grandpa was easy. So that kind of comes down the line, and how one experiences love, and how that structure of the parent, the 10th house, 4th house thing comes out, and then how's that passed down to me and my siblings, and how that works out, and the difficulties my mom experienced from going into her own adulthood, and what she had not yet healed, or what she is working on throughout her life. And so I think it's interesting to see these themes as looking across the generations. I find it hard to get, I'm sure a lot of people have a hard time getting, birth data beyond, Pluto in Cancer, going back. So anyway, any other thoughts?
Sarrah, this is fascinating. I've done a little bit. I'm really into genealogy, and I have a lot of birth dates on both sides of my family, and I've looked a little bit of it. But to hear you, present this, and to see the connection with the Venus, the values, and the Uranus, the trauma, and how all the little stories kind of interweave and get passed down, and how they, especially, with your daughter, that's a really heavy karmic connection between you, and for and the implications for her going forward.
Right.
Thank you for sharing all this.
Right. And this is just the mother line. I haven't even tapped into her dad's side, because her dad definitely has the Scorpio line that I've learned about. I didn't even know that he shared this with that. I think it was around Christmas that he learned that his grandmother's mother, so his grandmother's mother, so out a bit there, had owned a big house or big land and so forth way back in the day. So she was a prostitute, because then she could own land, and that's the reason she was that. And so that's on Sydney's line on her. So she was a madam, and she owned everything. So
wow.
I was like, what? I didn't know this. I'm like, what a Scorpio line. Oh my, okay. And he goes, I just got a little bit of the information, but he shared that. I was like, oh, that's so interesting to know the stuff down the line. And there's also on his line also death, that's very Scorpio, and I have that also on my grandfather's side. So if I went on the father's side, there would be even more Pluto. So it's kind of coming down into this, into my child in Sydney's. But it's kind of, looking at it from, what is her soul going to do with this? Where is she going to take it? Where is she going to heal and grow from this? So yeah, it's very fascinating to follow the line and see what happens, right?
Yeah, it gets distilled a little bit more with each step, and refined, and that's great.
Yeah, but I get fascinated because I love to hear family stories. So I hit my mother up to, get a little bit more. I knew some of my grandmother's stuff, but she, fills in the blank on things, and then to put that all into the mix. And I really think I have to take all her information, almost put it in like a chronological ordered timeline, so I could kind of, follow it along and then look at her stuff. But I don't have, excuse me, a birth time for grandma. So I'm probably going to have to try to rectify the chart, which I've never done before, to see how close I can get. And that will give me a little closer perspective on her moon, because that would be pretty important. But I think it's still pretty powerful. My mom has got a lot of information. She's kept great records and so forth. So it'll be interesting to tackle that.
Get it while you can, because once they're gone, you don't need that source anymore.
Yeah. My mom's a great scrapbooker, and she has all these stories and lots of photos and stuff. So it's good. Awesome. But I hope this was good for sharing with everybody. I know it's kind of taken different pieces and tried to weave together, something that just popped on me. And I was watching this video and it's like, gosh, that sounds like evolutionary astrology and kind of what we do when we go to regression therapy to kind of make a connection to heal something that's been carried forward. It's exactly what it sounds like. You're healing the information, as he says, on the space-time vacuum continuum. So it's like, it's very scientific how he says it, but it makes sense because it's in our psyche. We are carrying that memory, and that's, the Uranus piece, all of it, and we bring in the pieces as we're ready, right? So I thought it was fascinating. Couldn't help myself.
You heal it back and you heal it forward. Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
So it's quite fascinating. So anyone else? Wow, I actually finished before 3:10.
No? Sarah, I can see something else.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so you both have your south nodes in Virgo. You and your daughter, and of course the north nodes in Pisces. And her Uranus is conjunct your north node. So we can see that that's coming straight in, that connection. And also one of the co-rulers of Pisces is Jupiter.
Yes.
And both of your Jupiters are in Scorpio, which is a desire to really, go down deep in. Yes. And of course, Scorpio is the soul. So there's another connection there.
Yeah, it's really, really deep. Which is funny because I even parent that way sometimes. It's kind of you won't get away with it because I have my third eye and I can see what you're doing. So I tease her a little bit when, because she can be secretive. So it's like, you think you're hiding it from me, but I can see it anyway. So
I wonder if your Pluto and your South Node in Virgo can have something to do with religious conditioning that you've brought in, perhaps, and your daughter evolving that forward through her Pluto in Sag. Like, she's more interested in the natural truth.
I have to tell you
something. Thinking that could be an evolution through the generations.
Yes, and let me share something with you, because when I first started in astrology, she was like, wanted to play with the symbols and whatever. And then she's like, I'm not going to be an astrologer, Mom. I'm going to be whatever, right? But she's like, when I mentioned God or whatever, creator, whatever, she's like, Mom, it's all Mother Nature. She just shakes her head at me. She's just like, it's all Mother Nature, Mom. She just it's like, okay. So in that, going back to Nasim's theory, he proves it mathematically. And I think he's beyond the, what I would call the traditional academia world in theory physicist.
Yeah.
He's leading edge, bleeding edge. And some people are like, if he's right, if what his stuff is right, because it has to be peer-reviewed, journaled, and all that stuff, he's still going through that. He's light years ahead of everybody, right? Like, oh my gosh, it's all, his math makes sense of understanding the spiritual nature, right? It's like, oh my God, it's beautiful. And so it just makes me think that, as my daughter, she's another she's like, how many Pluto generations beyond me? And not beyond me, but just different, right? And it being Sagittarius, she's bringing stuff in that, oh yeah, Mom, it's just the natural world. Like well, we're not quite there yet with the technology. And then she's just like, it's absolute. Like, she just looks at me and, But it's like she has a knowing at some certain level, but at the same time, she's going to have to go through her own process. I mean, she's still quite young. And she's working on her opinion being valued. I can see that, like when she makes a statement and having it valued. So there's something to that as well. So absolutely, I see that with our connection.
Yeah, and her statement, it's all Mother Nature. It's all Mother Nature. Her moon's in Sag. So of course she would have that, you know, as part of her reality.
Yeah. And she's she has like 5 things she wants to be when she grows up. And one of them is an animal rescuer.
Right.
A scientist, a teacher. Yeah. Very much into and she loves art. She draws extensively dragons. I have pages and pages and pages and pages. I mean, huge drawings of dragons. And I don't know if that's a Scorpio thing or what. Or just the 5th house going quite creative. She's hundreds of them, and they all have something uniquely different. So it's fascinating. I don't have anything else. Is that anyone else have anything?
Any other comments? Well, we're right on the dot of 1 hour, so that's pretty
perfect.
Good.
Well, that's great. Well,
okay, well, you can wind it down and you can stop sharing if you like. Stop sharing the screen.
How do I do that?
It should be at the top, stop share. I think it's in the little red section.
It says, stop recording, stop sharing. No, it says new share. I don't know. It's not giving me a stop share or pause share.
Okay, well, we've just gone back to the single screen.
Okay.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, everyone.
I met Nasim once. He was amazing.
Nasim would be very interesting to me. I don't know how to stop the share, so can I just end it this way, or?
Well, it should be straight at the top.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
I found it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good. It'd be good to go back to the panel. That's great. So thank you, Sarah. That was amazing.
No, that's all right. Thank you.
I love Nasim Haramein. I think he's fantastic.
Very interesting.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yay! I met him. I had dinner with him. He's fascinating.
Oh,
great.
I know.
That's amazing.
Lucky. I didn't really know his work, and I told him I was an evolutionary astrologer.
Yeah.
And he said, I want to test you to see if you understand evolution. I was like, wow, okay.
Did you pass the test? I'm sure you passed it.
I don't know. It was hard to tell, actually.
Yeah.
He's very mysterious. And we were there for other reasons. We were there for business.
Yeah.
Yet he makes so much sense. Like, even though it's like really deep and, you know, like scientific, I can understand him. It's really easy. He's really quite easy to understand, isn't he? Yeah, he puts it across really well.
Yep. He simplifies it for you. And I love how he brings in the masters or, esoteric teaching and shows the bridge. That's what I love. It's like, oh, yes, okay. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah. I think on a soul level, we all know this anyway, but he's able to put it into mathematical calculations. And,
Yeah.
Great.
He's still, having to be peer reviewed. So from the Saturnian structure of how things have been done before, he's still trying to get it into that, but he is publishing, so it does take time.
Yeah, that's incredible. All right, thanks again, and I'll
Thank
just
you.
unmute everybody.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Sarah. That was fascinating.
Bye-bye.
Good on you, Sarah.